In July 1943, saboteurs from England parachuted deep behind enemy lines into Nazi-occupied France. Their target was the power station which supplied electricity to one of France's biggest factories, making steel for the German army. By now, the Special Operations Executive, SOE, could strike in the heart of enemy territory. Their agents in the field were supported by a dedicated secret organization back home.
The whole job was landing agents, supplying them with stores, and picking them up again. And all these operations were done with nothing written about them at all. They were all top secret.
He said, whatever happens here, nobody must know what goes on. You mustn't tell your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your fiancé. So I very sort of timidly said, I haven't got a fiancé. He said, well, if you get one, you don't tell him anything.
Whether we were printing French ration cards or whether we were printing identity cards or birth certificate, everything had to be absolutely perfect because they were examined by the Gestapo. So they had to be absolutely bang on.
I thought, what the hell they want lumps of coal for? Well, I soon found out that they were going to fill them with plastic explosive and trundle them off to wherever they want to blow something up. Those people were revolutionary types. They were taught how to look after themselves with whatever they had at hand. Your fists and your feet and your knees are part of you. Use them with dire results to your opponent.
Whether an agent lived or died could depend upon people like these, working behind the scenes in Britain. Two family flats in London's West End were the unlikely birthplace of an aggressive new phase in Britain's secret war against Germany. In November 1940, SOE had been operating for 4 months with limited success when it requisitioned the apartments in Berkeley Court. The work begun here would transform the organization into an efficient and lethal fighting force.
In the winter of 1940, everything was very improvised. I mean, instead of the nice army trestle tables covered by a blanket, which of course we'd all been used to, our offices were furnished with pretty nasty furniture from the cheaper end of the Tottenham Court Road. And the whole thing was run in a civilian and really rather unsuitable basis.
SOE's head was a civilian, Dr. Hugh Dalton, the Minister for Economic Warfare. The military had resented SOE's independence. Dalton needed to demonstrate that his organization was not a waste of precious resources. The man he turned to was Colin Gubbins. He was a dynamic career soldier who believed in irregular warfare.
He was a wonderful leader of the young, whom we inspired. He had an imaginative temperament, really quite visionary. Gubbins was one of those who saw things through from first principles to the bitter end.
Gubbins had to create an entire secret army from scratch. For the moment, sending agents into the field was an impossibility.
There wasn't really a single wireless set operating direct to SOE in the whole of occupied Europe. There was no question whatever of any sort of underground warfare or subversive activities of any kind until, first of all, communications have been established with occupied Europe, and then one had to recruit some sort of organization, deliver arms and equipment and set up the thing.
SOE's recruits could be men or women, civilians or soldiers. All had to speak a foreign language if they were to survive undercover. Dutchman Guido Zemp-Schrever spoke 5. A former shipping clerk, he had escaped to England when the Germans invaded Holland. Zemp-Schrever joined the commandos, but had found even that too tame for his adventurous spirit.
It's very nice doing all kind of tricks, climbing up a church tower or going shooting in the early morning. I needed something more. It was my first step in the SOE world.
SOE recruits would have to be trained in a new kind of combat, lethal and ungentlemanly. To learn how to kill, trainee agents were sent to a secret base at Arisaig in the Western Highlands.
The people up there, of course, from way back, were very conscious of keeping a secret. After Culloden in 1746, Prince Charlie was hidden away. A price was put on his head of £30,000 for the government, but nobody would give him a whisper away, and it's inbred honesty, loyalty within the people up there. Nobody would say a word about SOE.
One of Arisaig's first instructors was Ernest van Morik. SOE was so secret that even he knew little about his employers.
SOE was not a term that I'd ever heard of, or anybody up at Arisaig had heard of. Brigadier Gubbins did come up to see us with Hugh Dalton, the Minister of Economic Warfare, and we all sort of hiked the hills together. And I remember saying to my commandant, Major Jimmy Young, "What has this civilian got to do with it? I thought we were in the army." And because now you tell me that he's our overall boss. And I remember Jimmy Young replying, "Well, the more I stay in this outfit, the more puzzled I get too."
SOE's combat training was influenced by the unorthodox methods of 2 former Shanghai police officers, William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes.
Sykes was a most benevolent-looking person. He could have worn pince-nez and a dog collar and have been in your local parish church pulpit. But in fact, once he got going, he was pretty lethal.
He was a very popular instructor. As to his shooting abilities, he is said to have been the fastest shot in the Shanghai police force, drawing from a shoulder holster, cocking the gun as he drew it, and hitting the target in a third of a second.
Sykes taught a new kind of shooting. He had developed it in the deadly battle against the criminal underworld of Shanghai.
In the army, if one was given a pistol, one would have held both arms out in front of you and taken aim, by which time you might well have been shot yourself. They went on the principle that if you've got a gun in your hand and you point instinctively, you probably hit the target. Just in case you don't stop him first time, they taught us to fire twice.
In a book published during the war, Fairbairn and Sykes revealed how successful the technique had been in Shanghai.
killed police 42, criminals 260.
William Fairbairn, seen in this training film, was the instructor in silent killing.
On how many occasions may your life depend on correct dealing with a sentry? He should be stalked from behind, then struck across the Adam's apple and punched in the small of the back. And he's dragged away to where the Japanese stranglehold can be applied. And that's the end of that one.
Oh, it was completely revolutionary. We'd never done this before. It was never thought the kind of thing that one would have to do. But when you're involved in undercover work, you have to be ready to tackle all sorts of emergencies and all sorts of situations. And so they were teaching all kinds of holds, use of hands, hitting people various places of the body, all kinds of lethal places where you could just push your hand and it could result in death.
SOE's commando training aimed to promote confidence, initiative, and aggression. The most successful recruits did not always play by the rules. One of Van Morick's trainees was Michael Trotterbas, a 27-year-old Brighton chef. He displayed the kind of resourcefulness needed in clandestine warfare. One night, Trotterbas secretly constructed a bomb to supplement his wartime rations with fresh salmon from a nearby loch. But his fishing trip was too successful. Dozens of salmon were killed. The locals were outraged.
I always wanted to have the opportunity of going back there after the war and telling them that Trotterbas had distinguished himself. He had been captured, he'd led a jail outbreak, he'd come back to England again, he'd been re-parachuted into France, and then after a lot of rail sabotage, somebody had betrayed his hideout. The Gestapo had arrived, he'd shot dead the first man and then was shot himself. And I felt that they would have forgiven him for blowing up their salmon.
By early 1941, the Germans had strengthened their hold on Europe. Gubbins was now ready to send the first agents across the Channel. But the RAF would not supply planes, nor could the Royal Navy help with either submarines or large ships. On a Cornish estuary, SOE put together its own fleet to make clandestine journeys across the Channel. It was a bizarre collection of small craft. One of them was the Moutin, a 60-ton French fishing boat. Tom Long joined SOE the day after she had been strafed by German planes.
There was shipwrights there digging out shrapnel from all over the vessel and patching it all up. And there was a heap of sails there. They had blood and I was all shot up and all that. I thought, Jesus Christ, what the hell have I let myself in for now?
Long was soon put at the helm of another unusual SOE boat, a seaplane tender borrowed from the RAF. Designed to work with the Air Force, it was a confusing vessel for a Navy man like Long.
I'd been quartermaster on 2 destroyers. I'd steered all kind of merchant ships, but they put me in front of an aircraft compass. Well, that completely flummoxed me because you put the wheel the opposite way. And it was quite a bit of time before I got used to turning the wheel the opposite way.
The aim was to slip across the Channel at night. Good local knowledge of the Breton coast was crucial. SOE employed a French tuna fisherman called Pierre Guillet. one Royal Navy officer refused to let him on board.
This new officer, a lieutenant commander, he said, I don't need any stupid bloody Frenchman to show me the French coast or anything. I was navigating officer of the Queen Mary when she done a world court tour. And you, sure, I don't need you.
Without Pierre Guillet, they were lost. After 4 unsuccessful attempts to find a landing place, SOE insisted that the Frenchman be on board, Navy or no Navy.
Pierre got on the bridge and he said, "Migo," and the lieutenant commander said, "Yes, you're coming this time." So he said, "Well, if Migo, you fuck off ashore, 'cause I ain't going with you."
Even with Pierre's local knowledge, navigating in total darkness was a hazardous affair.
Pierre would go to the bow and he'd be waving this way, that way and all the rest on it, and I'd steer under his directions. There was great rocks lumbering up and all the rest on it, and I would think, Jesus Christ, a bloody fish couldn't swim through here with scratching his bloody tail. And when we got there and anchored, Pierre used to cry like a baby, because he was on French soil.
With the mother craft anchored offshore, agents and equipment were landed from canoes.
When we landed on the beach, we didn't know whether that was mined. We didn't know whether there was a party there of Germans waiting to welcome us. And we didn't know, unless there was resistance there, how was we going to dispose of the stores we got.
As well as taking agents into France, Tom Long took resistance fighters out. Finding their way back to the mothership in the dark was a problem, until SOE's technical experts came up with an ingenious solution.
These luminous balls were just smaller than a golf ball, and they was the most wonderful things we had. When you was coming back, you held up your luminous ball so the mother craft could see it, and they could come to pick you up.
From early operations like these, SOE gleaned vital intelligence about conditions in occupied Europe. Information that could make the crucial difference between an agent's survival or his capture. The final stage in an agent's training took place at Beaulieu in the New Forest. SOE had taken over several houses on Lord Montagu's estate.
They were trying to really test them to the final metal, to find out if they would stand up against not necessarily terrible interrogations, but against the ordinary little things which make up everyday life, which quite often trip them.
John Debenham Taylor was an instructor at Beaulieu. He told his trainees that ignorance of the tiniest detail could lead to disaster.
One anecdote which I used to pass on was the case of a chap who had recently arrived in France, and shortly after his arrival had gone into a cafe and had asked for a café noir, black coffee, which immediately aroused the waitress's attention, because of course there wasn't any other kind of coffee you could have in France in those days.
Before the war, Debenham Taylor had studied agriculture. Now he found himself teaching a whole range of very different skills.
The main emphasis there was in trying simple methods of disguise. How you could change your appearance by wearing glasses when you normally didn't, by not shaving, or by shaving when you normally didn't. Generally changing your appearance by simple means. One particular skill I remember
was of making false scars with collodion. But it doesn't last too long, so that, it's not as if you can greatly change your appearance with measures like that.
Debenham Taylor became an expert lockpicker. His most impressive demonstration involved opening a pair of German cuffs.
I found that if you got some catgut, violin string or something like that, or even indeed thin wire, and wound it over something like about the width of a diary pencil, by lifting it off the pencil and pushing it down the bolt, the cylinder, and tightening it by holding one end in your teeth and pulling the other, you could fix it round the bottom of the bolt, and then pulling the two together would free the bolt sufficiently for the cuff to open. And that did work fairly well. In fact, I was finally able to do it with my hands behind my back.
The Bewley course was designed to root out those who would not survive as an undercover agent. George Brown, an Oxford chemistry graduate, was ordered to break into an SOE property near Bewley as a practical exercise. Unfortunately, he got the wrong building.
I found this house with a window open, so I entered. But I very quickly realized, presumably from the furniture or the surroundings, that it wasn't a house occupied by a military establishment, really. So I got out through the window I'd gone in through and ran away.
Things got worse when, late at night, Brown was hauled into a mock interrogation.
I was called into a very small room, quite unexpectedly, and found that there were three, I presume, British officers dressed up as German officers sitting on the other side of a table. It was very high level of light intensity, it was very hot, it was a very small room, and they proceeded to treat me extremely roughly, verbally. I found it difficult to take the whole exercise seriously, and so I suppose probably in extremis, I think probably I started laughing, and they called the whole thing off, rather crossly.
George Brown did not become an agent. Guido Zemschrever's passing out exercise was for real. SOE ordered him to find a Liverpool schoolteacher called Fiona. She was suspected of smuggling Nazi sympathizers to the Irish Republic with IRA help. Zemschrever made contact with her in a pub.
Let it be known that I was an escaped POW and that I tried to go to Ireland. Though I'm not very tall, I was not a bad-looking boy. And then a girl is a girl, especially if she's good-looking. She had beautiful green eyes and black hair. Under special circumstances, once you get to the pillow, things are much easier.
After 11 days of passion, Fiona arranged to smuggle Zemschrever to Ireland.
I managed to phone London, and they told me, well, go ahead. The worst which can happen is that you find yourself in Cork.
The next morning, a seaman took Zemschrever to a ship at Birkenhead. The police pounced as they were boarding. When Zemschrever was released in front of Fiona, she realized she'd been betrayed.
She spit at me. I felt like a heel. It was part of the job.
Noreen Reel Rose also had to put her loyalty to SOE above her own personal feelings. She took part in an elaborate test of trainee agents' discretion. An accidental meeting would be contrived in a Bournemouth hotel.
They would be there in the evening, early evening, sitting with one of the instructors, and I would walk in, whereupon the instructor would say, "Oh, how lovely to see you. Come and have a drink. If you're not doing anything, why don't you join us for dinner?" Whereupon a telephone call would come for the instructor, and he would come back and say, "Look, I'm most awfully sorry, but I have to leave you. Why don't you two go ahead and have dinner, and I'll join you as soon as I can." My job was to get him to talk.
It's not the pale moon that excites me.
Noreen and her companion, a trainee Danish agent, wandered onto the hotel terrace to look at the sea.
I let him hold my hand and get a bit sentimental, and I said, you know, come on, what are you up to? Are you going to be here for long, shall we? And then he said, well, no, I'm leaving next week. And I said, oh, where are you going? And he said, well, I'm being parachuted back into Denmark. And I then all goggle-eyed, I said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, you may not know about it, but a lot of people are parachuted now into enemy-occupied territory to act as agent spies. I'm organising resistance groups so that when the invasion comes, there are people ready there to stand up and rebel against the Germans. And I don't think I pressed him very much more than that, because I knew that there was no point. He was into it up to his neck. It was dreadful. He'd gone through all this training, and just for the moonlight on a warm summer evening, he cracked.
By early 1942, Gubbins had about 200 agents inside occupied Europe. Their survival was dependent on more than just good training. German propaganda films urged people to be alert for English spies. SOE had to ensure that everything in an agent's possession could withstand the most critical examination by the Gestapo.
Also machen Sie kein Theater, gehen Sie.
In August, SOE set up its own false documents section at the Essex home of Lord Alderman. SOE called it Station 14. Pauline Brockes joined the section at the age of 19. She worked in the technical office.
I was taken into this office. I was very astonished when I found out what was going on, because I had absolutely no idea whatsoever.
Station 14's craftsmen could reproduce anything at short notice. In 1942, the French resistance sent over an example of a new Russian card that was about to be introduced.
We actually delivered, I think, several thousand blank Russian cards to France one day before the official ones were actually issued by the French authorities.
Pauline Brockes shared an office with one of the section's stars. Before the war, Sergeant Major Gatwood had been a policeman. Now he was an expert handwriting forger.
His skill was absolutely fantastic. I mean, to think he had the largest inkstand you've ever seen, with all sorts of coloured inks and things, and different kinds of pens. And I never ever saw him practice. He wrote straight onto the card or whatever it was that he was signing. which I think is remarkable.
Gatwood's work would be put to the ultimate test. The German battleship Tirpitz, moored in a Norwegian fjord, posed a major threat to the North Atlantic convoys. In October 1942, SOE and the Royal Navy mounted a joint operation against her, using a Norwegian trawler as a cover. Bad weather caused it to be aborted, but not before Gatwood's forgeries had proved their worth. Inside the fjord, the trawler was stopped by a German patrol vessel.
The German officer that boarded the ship called for the papers, and when they were brought to him and he examined them, he recognised this man's signature. And in point of fact, it wasn't his friend's signature. They were our documents that we'd done at Royden. So it just shows that, you know, they were perfect, weren't they?
Station 14 would forge some 275,000 different documents for agents around the world. But to operate undercover, secret agents required more than just good papers. Even the tiniest details in their clothing or possessions could give them away.
More and more refugees have been arriving in Britain from the Low Countries, and Britain, in accordance with her tradition, welcomes these innocent victims of Hitler's barbarity.
As refugees arrived in England, they were given new clothes. Unknown to them, their old possessions would be used to outfit agents.
It was mostly male things to start with. Obviously, they didn't think of women right away. It was suitcases, it was the continental overcoats, some of them had these fur collars on, it was hats, gloves, ties, anything that they wanted to give us.
As demand outstripped supply, SOE's camouflage section entered the rag trade. It used a fashion company called La Rocco to manufacture agents' clothes. Claudia Pulver had been born in Vienna and trained as a dress designer.
We got old shirts from the refugees again. We took them apart. We looked at the way they were manufactured. We looked at the seams, and there certainly was an enormous difference between the side seams that were made on the continent and those that were made in England. The buttonhole on the collar stand was vertical rather than horizontal. That was quite a major difference. We made a lot of different cardboard patterns of European shapes and ways of doing things, so that we would have a library for people to choose their own shapes from when they came to us.
At its peak, camouflage section outfitted an average of 16 agents a day. SOE's most famous female agents came to Claudia for a bespoke service.
We had Violet Chabo, who was probably the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. Most of them knew exactly what they wanted because they'd been living abroad in France. They all spoke French or German perfectly, of course.
The attention to detail was meticulous.
Every article of clothing had to have all English marks removed, including zip fasteners on the flies, because they used to have lightning zip on nearly all of them. Well, all that had to be taken out with a dentist drill, because that would have been a giveaway straight away if an agent was captured. So it was a very, very thorough job because a man's life depended on it.
Before the war, Albert Adlington had worked in the film industry as a plasterer, making props. There he met a director called Elder Wills. When war broke out, Adlington joined the infantry, but was suddenly summoned to a mysterious meeting at London's Victoria and Albert Museum, where SOE had a workshop.
He was Captain Wills, and he greeted me and shook hands, and we've caught up with you at last, you see. And I saluted him. Oh, cut that bullshit out. We said, don't want none of that. You're here to work. We know what you can do. He said, that's what you're going to do.
Adlington was sent to Camouflage Section's headquarters, which was housed in the Thatched Barn Inn in North London. There he was instructed to distress new articles so that they would not look out of place in an agent's possession. He was so skilled at this task that he was nicknamed the Ager. Important visitors were sometimes given a tour of the workshop. One morning, after a visit by an American general, Adlington found a pair of gloves on his workbench. He gave them the full treatment.
And that same afternoon, this general came back. And he said, he said, I left my gloves in here. So I said, oh, were they yellow pigskin ones? He said, yeah. I said, yeah, there they are. No, he said, they're not mine. He said, mine was new. I said, they were they till you put them on the end of the bench. And he thought it was marvellous. He said, I shall keep those gloves forever. He used to remind me of this dreadful place that they brought me into.
Albert Adlington's experience of making film props was now used to disguise secret radio equipment that was to be smuggled into Europe.
A log would be brought in. Well, this had to be moulded in two halves. You did what we call a skin mould. You got a bucket of gelatine, hot, very hot, and you just poured some of this gelatine on the log, and it would run down. And eventually, the whole thing would be covered in gelatine, about half an inch thick. And once it was set, you then splash some of the plaster out of the bucket onto the gelatine and wrap the whole thing up in canvas that had been soaked in plaster. Once you'd done one half, you turned the thing over and then did exactly the same on the other half. They were all packed and they were sealed with the radio inside. They were taken off to Poland, where the man that was the agent was a woodcutter.
Camouflage Section used similar techniques to disguise weapons of offense. Adlington's most bizarre task was to collect samples of camel dung from London Zoo. Cast in papier-mâché, they were to become an unusual booby trap. Elder Wills ordered him to keep his mission secret at all costs.
I went in a little truck, and he said to me, now, once you're at the zoo and you get what you want, nobody is allowed to look in there. He said, and if anyone does, there's a revolver. Shoot them. Oh, Christ. Anyway, we're coming through Hyde Park on the way back, and we're stopped by two redcaps. They wanted to know what we were doing. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. And one of them went to walk round to have a look in there.
Not so fast.
I said, if you touch those buckles, I shall shoot you. And I got this revolver. I would have shot the bugger. I would, because we were told nobody was to see what was in the back of that vehicle. Apparently whatever they used them for was very successful. Probably blowing up something out in the desert, because they would only want to camel shit in the desert, wouldn't they?
When that man is dead and gone. When that man is dead.
It was SOE scientists who supplied agents with their most lethal devices. Delayed action fuses, incendiaries, the well rod, the silenced pistol for assassinations. There was even a gas gun designed as a pen.
Treat your tear gas pen device as any other quality instrument. Keep it clean, and if it does require oil, use a good quality household oil. Following these simple directions will mean years of service.
When that man is dead and gone.
Gadgets flowed from SOE's Research and Development section at the Frith in Welwyn Garden City. Some practical, some bizarre. Chemistry student George Brown had not made it as an agent. Now he was to become a boffin, testing equipment to see how it would perform in the field.
Someone said, would I spend a week testing a still for making drinking water out of rainwater or seawater? So in the shed I tested this still. At the end of the week, the man who'd put me onto it came and said, you know, what have you made? And I said, right, so I've come to a very, very, very clear conclusion. Rather than take this still anywhere, take some drinking water with you. And he thought that was rather sensible.
Brown learned to dive in order to test strange craft on Staines Reservoir.
The first was a device which came to be called the well bomb, which you strapped on your back, and it was a sort of little mobile propeller. When you got onto Staines Reservoir with this thing in the back, it had the effect of propelling you round in circles, and I believe it never got any further than that. There was no way, it seemed to me, in which you could steer it. I had a not dissimilar experience with the submersible canoe, which by using the right sort of levers you could take lower or higher in the water. And I was rather put out when I discovered that at that time anyhow, Staines Reservoir was full of rather nasty algae and even nastier looking mangy fish. So I was extremely pleased when I got this canoe back onto the surface again. And again, as far as I know, nothing ever again was heard of that canoe.
George Brown's most important contribution was to improve SOE's technique for sabotaging railways. He found that detonating the track under the locomotive did not always derail the train.
We spent quite a lot of time at the railway testing centre seeing how we could get the train to blow up the line ahead of itself. We put the fog signal, which was operated by the wheels of the locomotive, and then a length of cortex stretching out in front of the engine, with the aim of making sure that the hole in the line was in front of the engine before it got there.
By 1943, SOE was a more efficient, if unconventional, fighting force. But there were still those in the military who questioned the value of guerrilla warfare. SOE's most forceful critic was Sir Arthur Harris, the head of Bomber Command. He believed that bomber raids offered the only path to victory.
There are a lot of people who say that bombing can never win a war. Well, my answer to that is that it has never been tried yet, and we shall see. Germany...
Harris vigorously opposed the use of his planes by SOE as a waste of resources. Colin Gubbins, SOE's head of operations, needed to demonstrate just how effective his agents could be. In the autumn of 1943, he got his chance. Le Creusot was a huge industrial complex near Chalon-sur-Saône in Burgundy. It manufactured steel. Intelligence reports suggested that it supplied the Germans with heavy guns, armored cars, and tanks. So big and so important was Le Creusot that it was nicknamed the Krups of France. In October 1942, 94 Lancasters had bombed the factory. Aerial reconnaissance showed only slight damage to the complex. But 62 civilians had been killed in the raid. Bomber Command attacked again in June 1943.
The war factories of Axis Europe are feeling the weight of Bomber Command, which seeks out and strikes.
Despite the propaganda, this time 282 civilians had been killed. For SOE, this was a chance to show that they could succeed where Bomber Command had failed. 2 French agents were selected. Raymond Bassett was a fireman. André Jarreau was a car mechanic who had been appalled by the casualties in his hometown. Shortly before his death earlier this year, Jarreau talked about his work as a saboteur.
I wanted to attack factories, but not to destroy the factory or its workers. I wanted to destroy the factory's means of production, electric transformers, turbines, motors. They would repair them, and I would destroy them again. I was pleased to do my duty.
By now, SOE could precisely identify the sabotage targets that would cause the maximum damage. The plan was simultaneously to attack the 3 main power stations that supplied Le Creusot with electricity. Jarreau and Bassett were parachuted back into France with special equipment to do the job. On the night of the 31st of August, their teams fitted magnetic clam lines with delayed action fuses. Dressed as a worker, Bassett evaded 20 gendarmes and 2 German soldiers and slipped into the central power station. Meanwhile, at a nearby transformer station, Jarreau gave his resistance group their first instruction in how to place explosives correctly. By 1 a.m., all the charges had been fixed and the fuses activated.
There was no electricity there at all. We disturbed the whole French economy in this way.
The operation was a total success. 10 transformers were destroyed, and production at the Le Creusot factory was crippled. There were no civilian casualties. Gubbins recommended both agents for military honors, rarely awarded to foreign nationals. Raymond Bassett received the Military Cross. André Jarreau got the Distinguished Conduct Medal and the Military Medal. SOE had demonstrated that small groups of saboteurs could do more damage than a fleet of heavy bombers. Now it had to expand its resistance networks throughout occupied Europe. In July 1943, saboteurs from England parachuted deep behind enemy lines into Nazi-occupied France. Their target was the power station which supplied electricity to one of France's biggest factories, making steel for the German army. By now, the Special Operations Executive, SOE, could strike in the heart of enemy territory. Their agents in the field were supported by a dedicated secret organization back home.
The whole job was landing agents, supplying with stores, and picking them up again. And all these operations were done with nothing written about them at all. They were all top secret.
He said, whatever happens here, nobody must know what goes on. You mustn't tell your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your fiancé. So I very sort of timidly said, I haven't got a fiancé. And he said, well, if you get one who doesn't, you don't tell him anything.
Whether we were printing French ration cards or whether we were printing identity cards or birth certificate, everything had to be absolutely perfect because they were examined by the Gestapo. So they had to be absolutely bang on.
And I thought, what the hell they want lumps of coal for? Well, I soon found out that they were going to fill them with plastic explosive and trundle them off to wherever they want to blow something up. Those people were revolutionary types. They were taught how to look after themselves with whatever they had at hand. Your fist.
Dalton needed to demonstrate that his organization was not a waste of precious resources. The man he turned to was Colin Gubbins. He was a dynamic career soldier who believed in irregular warfare.
He was a wonderful leader of the young, whom we inspired. He had an imaginative temperament, really quite visionary. Gubbins was one of those who saw things through from first principles to the bitter end.
Gubbins had to create an entire secret army from scratch. For the moment, sending agents into the field was an impossibility.
There wasn't really a single wireless set operating direct to SOE in the whole of occupied Europe. There was no question whatever of any sort of underground warfare or subversive activities of any kind until, first of all, communications had been established with occupied Europe, and then one had to recruit some sort of organization, deliver arms and equipment and set up the thing.
SOE's recruits could be men or women, civilians or soldiers. All had to speak a foreign language if they were to survive undercover. Dutchman Guido Zemsch-Schrever spoke 5. A former shipping clerk, he had escaped to England when the Germans invaded Holland. Zemsch-Schrever joined the commandos, but had found even that too tame for his adventurous spirit.
It's very nice doing all kind of tricks, climbing up a church tower or going shooting in the early morning. I needed something more. It was my first step in the SOE world.
SOE recruits would have to be trained in a new kind of combat, lethal and ungentlemanly. To learn how to kill, trainee agents were sent to a secret base at Arisaig in the Western Highlands.
The people up there, of course, from way back, were very conscious of keeping a secret. After Culloden in 1746, Prince Charlie was hidden away. A price was put on his head of £30,000 for the government, but nobody would give him a whisper away, and it's inbred honesty, loyalty within the people up there. Nobody would say a word about SOE.
One of Arisaig's first instructors was Ernest van Morik. SOE was so secret that even he knew little about his employers.
SOE was not a term that I'd ever heard of, or anybody up at Arisaig had heard of. Brigadier Gubbins did come up to see us with Hugh Dalton, the Minister of Economic Warfare, and we all sort of hiked the hills together. And I remember saying to my commandant, Major Jimmy Young, "What has this civilian got to do with it? I thought we were in the army." And because now you tell me that he's our overall boss. And I remember Jimmy Young replying, "Well, the more I stay in this outfit, the more puzzled I get too."
SOE's combat training was influenced by the unorthodox methods of 2 former Shanghai police officers, William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes.
Sykes was a most benevolent-looking person. He could have worn pince-nez and a dog collar and have been in your local parish church pulpit. But in fact, once he got going, he was pretty lethal.
He was a very popular instructor. As to his shooting abilities, he is said to have been the fastest shot in the Shanghai police force, drawing from a shoulder holster, cocking the gun as he drew it, and hitting the target in a third of a second.
Sykes taught a new kind of shooting. He had developed it in the deadly battle against the criminal underworld of Shanghai.
In the army, if one was given a pistol, one would have held both arms out in front of you and taken aim, by which time you might well have been shot yourself. They went on the principle that if you've got a gun in your hand and you point instinctively, you probably hit the target. Just in case you don't stop him first time, they taught us to fire twice.
And your feet and your knees are part of you. Use them for dire results to your opponent.
Whether an agent lived or died could depend upon people like these, working behind the scenes in Britain. Two family flats in London's West End were the unlikely birthplace of an aggressive new phase in Britain's secret war against Germany. In November 1940, SOE had been operating for 4 months with limited success when it requisitioned the apartments in Berkeley Court. The work begun here would transform the organization into an efficient and lethal fighting force.
In the winter of 1940, everything was very improvised. I mean, instead of the nice army trestle tables covered by a blanket, which of course we'd all been used to, our offices were furnished with pretty nasty furniture from the cheaper end of the Tottenham Court Road. And the whole thing was run in a civilian and really rather unsuitable basis.
SOE's head was a civilian, Dr. Hugh Dalton, the Minister for Economic Warfare. The military had resented SOE's independence